And unmute the mic. Okay, all right. So welcome everybody. For those of you who haven't been here before, this is ISSessions. We run this every couple weeks as part of the Information System Security Program. So today we're going to try a slightly different way of doing the news compared to what we usually do. Those of you who've come here before, we usually kind of plow through a huge number of different news stories related to our industry and tangentially related to our industry. This time, however, what we're going to do, we've seriously reduced the number of stories. We're only going to talk about the big stories, and we're going to go as deep as we can on them. And I'm sure if any of you do pay attention to the news, you'll probably have an idea of what we're going to cover, because it's the stuff that's basically been dominating the news cycles for the last few weeks. All right, so let's get right into it.
Well, with the goal of, hopefully more discussion than we tend to have. Because when it's just John and I, scrolling off headlines.
I neglected to mention, So basically, this is a totally open thing. So if at any point you want to say something, you want to ask questions, contribute to the discussion, whatever, just throw your hand up. I have a wonderful volunteer running a microphone for us today. That microphone is, if you want to talk, that microphone will come to you. And and you can ask any question, honestly, as long as it's sort of related to what we're talking about. So there are no dumb questions, even for those of you who are here and this isn't really in your wheelhouse. That's okay. We're totally cool with that. All right.
There are no dumb questions, just ones that will get the video demonetized on YouTube.
I'm not monetizing the video on purpose yet.
No.
Give
me my stupid joke and let's just go on.
Okay, fine. Okay. All right, so Equifax.
Who are they, John? Who's Equifax?
So basically, in the United States, there are three big credit bureaus. And these are essentially the three companies that are responsible to say whether you can get a mortgage, a credit card, what's your credit score, have you defaulted on loans, that kind of stuff. So in the United States...
That sounds like a major responsibility, John.
It does sound like a major responsibility, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, the credit bureau Equifax, responsible for hundreds of millions of people in the United States, and personal information such as their social insurance number, social security number. Because we're talking Americans. Sorry.
Well, maybe there might be more.
But wait, there's more.
Okay.
Essentially, what happened is it was a release. They came out with a news release, essentially saying, about 143 million records might have been taken from our databases. It includes, your name, address, social security number,
credit card
numbers, minor things, right? No big deal, right?
Literally all the stuff someone would need to open a bank account or take out a credit card or a loan or a line of credit or some kind of credit product in your name.
Basically, identity, this is prime identity theft target. Every single person who's leaked in that database likely could have someone, try to open up credit cards in their name, that kind of stuff, or trying to get loans, etc. So, bad. Really bad. So there's a lot of different areas that went on. Come on in. Please come in. Please get pizza. Go ahead. You're allowed to walk in front. It's okay.
We're going to here.
Okay, cool. All right. So basically, there's a lot to this story. At first, it seems like it's just sort of a standard, big breach happened, lots of records got leaked. We've seen big breaches before. We've even seen big, very serious breaches like the Office of Personnel Management in the U.S. government, which, for example, may have had results of lie detector tests for people getting clearance, or fingerprint data from people who with top secret clearance, for example. So that's pretty bad. But this one hits a much larger number of people, and there were a lot of stuff happened surrounding this.
Yeah. And to be fair though, we've also even seen in the past 6 months or so data breaches that have been larger in volume in terms of number of compromised records, right? Because what was the estimated Yahoo breach?
It's like 600 million or something stupid like that.
Yeah, like so there have even been larger breaches, but this one got a ton of recognition and credit
because of the nature of the data.
Yeah, the nature of the data, the severity of the data, and what it could potentially lead to anybody who was affected by this breach.
So basically, just to sum up, essentially what happened is Equifax announced that they had discovered on July 29th that there was a breach. They released a company statement to that effect.
They disclosed on July 29th that there was.
No,
they didn't discover the breach on the 29th.
No, July 29th. July.
Yeah.
This says the incident was discovered on July 29th.
Sorry, my bad. Yeah.
Because it's September now.
Yeah, it is September. Oh my god.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so anyways, all right. So basically, they disclosed that on July 29th, and I can't remember what the actual date of the press release was, but I'm going to guess it was probably around September 8th, based on that news article. But it might have been a little bit earlier.
It was on the Monday, wasn't it?
Whatever day that was.
Of that week. I think it was on the Monday because of something we're going to talk about later with the executive.
Okay.
Yeah.
So anyways, so basically they announced it, and it turned out, this breach actually happened like 2 months ago, 3 months ago, like a while ago, and it's taken them this long to, for whatever reason, come out and inform the public that are going to be affected by this. Now, do you think that if you just acquired, 130 million like social security numbers and things like that, do you think you're going to sit on that for 2 months and not use that at all? So yeah, I don't know, kind of rough there. So, and this is what we're going to dive into. We're going to dive into some of how the breach was handled, sort of from a PR perspective. We're also going to talk about the actual incident response itself. We're also going to talk about some of the side crap that went on that we inevitably kind of have to talk about as well. So,
and there was a lot of it.
My goodness, there was a lot of it. So basically what they did after they announced the breach was they essentially came out and said, hey, by the way, go to this website that seems super sketchy and enter in your social security number and we'll tell you. That kind of seems like, come to my website and enter your credit card number to see if it's been found in any breach. Oh, and don't forget the 3-digit code on the back because we really need that to check. So that right off the bat, it just kind of I think left a bad taste in the mouth for a lot of people. So first, we're going to talk about sort of how they handled the breach from a public and from a PR perspective.
This first link is the executives.
Yeah. And so this is to me part of them handling it, right? So part of handling a breach is handling public perception. Right, a good part of it, especially when you're a very large company like that. Communication is very important to those potentially affected by it. Well, right before the breach was actually publicly revealed, there were 3 managers that sold off just over $1 million worth of stock.
1.8 million.
Okay, my math is really bad then. But so now, and these guys sold, what amounted to I think 9% of their holdings, 4% of their holdings, something like that. But it was, it sort of reeked very quickly of really obvious sort of insider trading. Now, of course, the statements came out and said, well, they had no actual knowledge that this announcement was going to be made, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. I guess.
What you're telling me is that on the Friday before the statement was made the following week, they posted the sales of those stocks, right? And then the following week, the disclosure happens publicly.
Yeah.
But didn't you just tell me that a couple of months before is when they'd actually discovered the breach and called in a gigantic incident response firm?
So the question is, I guess that's the thing. So how do you hide the presence of a big, consulting firm coming in, especially, one of the sort of more well-renowned firms, Mandiant? I think anyone who works in the IT space, never mind security, if you see a company like Mandiant come into your building, you're going to sort of put 2 and 2 together and think, oh shit, we got hacked. That's why these guys are here and we're paying them a bunch of money to be here.
That's a reasonable assumption.
I don't know. So yeah, it's not a good look because this was one of the first things that came out after the breach was actually revealed. Was that this had kind of happened. So, whether it's genuine insider trading or not, it's a bad look.
It certainly is, especially given that the day that the breach announcement was made publicly, their stock did drop 13%.
Yeah.
So the fact that these folks, managed to sell off those funds before what they knew would probably be a significant drop occurred. So
Yeah.
Interesting.
So we'll hope the SEC looks into that pretty carefully.
Well, they've got their hands full. With
they kind of have they apparently have their hands full, which we'll talk about very briefly because there's not a lot of info on that right now. But man, everyone's hacked. Like I said a couple weeks ago, there's two companies: those that know they've been hacked and those that haven't. Oh, we got a question or comment over here. Okay, you got the mic. Is it on? Is it on? We'll hear you if it's on. Yes.
Testing. Oh.
Yeah.
All right, I gotta hold this back a bit.
Perfect.
So, I heard that actually one of the representatives from Equifax that was in charge of the Twitter account was suggesting, like the site you were talking about, to check to see if they'd been compromised. Sorry, this is like speech jamming me here in the echo.
Sorry.
They actually requested, you guys don't understand, but this is actually really hard to speak without.
No, I believe it's a real thing.
Yeah.
Just take the mic away and speak loudly.
Okay.
But please talk into the mic for the benefit of our live stream folks.
Okay. So yeah, the site that the representatives of Equifax were suggesting to the people on Twitter was actually a phishing site.
Oh, we'll get to that.
You're
We'll get
going to
that.
talk about that too?
We're
so
getting
all
there.
this and I'm
Yeah.
spoiling stuff. All right, nice. I like it. All right.
This thing is like Tor. There's so many layers to this onion.
Yeah. Oh, that's why we can spend a lot of time on this one because there's a whole lot of stuff going on. All right, so basically, the incident response superheroes Mandiant were called in to basically, do the cleanup. Now, there was a lot of stuff floating around sort of saying that, Equifax had previously sort of made statements saying like, oh, hey, FireEye is really good at protecting our network. We haven't been hacked, and then they
FireEye owns Mandiant.
FireEye owns Mandiant, by the way, if you weren't aware of that. And so, they kind of FireEye runs that shop apparently, and
they're often touted as a flagship client of FireEye. The fact that they secure and harden Equifax, so that's why it was also.
So then I mean, you can start getting into the whole. You can kind of get into some crazy conspiracy theories that hey, maybe FireEye wanted them to get hacked so they could bring Mandiant in for some more consulting revenue. Not likely, but if you want to throw that around.
I don't have any tinfoil. Sorry.
Tinfoil doesn't help, by the way.
Yeah. No. Fair enough.
It only enhances the transmission of your brainwaves.
Okay.
Yes.
Now.
Okay. So, anyways.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong. I did read somewhere too that someone said that they may have even been contacted as far back as March. Now, I haven't found a source for that one.
So
just like
what,
a straight.
Now, what I was, and my understanding with that was that there was actually a separate breach that Mandiant was called in for, a previous one in March. Cheryl's got something to say.
Yep.
Awesome.
Hi. Okay. Does this thing work?
It's for the stream.
Is this just to make me? It just makes me feel better. Okay.
It's
All
a
right.
comfort microphone.
So yeah, because I looked into this and I did a little bit of research and wrote up on it, and it was interesting because there was an incident around tax time affecting Equifax, but they made sure that they contacted the customers. They sort of advised the media. And yes, Mandiant / FireEye, they're pretty much one and the same.
Yeah.
We're in there. So it's a gray area as to whether or not the stuff that Mandiant found and the reason that they were hacked has come over onto this side. My money is that they're going to be related and there's going to be more fallout. It can only, somebody very smart said this, it can only get worse from here. So expect there to be more fallout. But yeah, that was a choice tidbit that was not fully made public, and then the rest of this just unfurled.
Kind of came out. Interesting.
Well, and the other thing, I mean, if you think of the OPM breach, I think it was 2 years ago now.
Yeah.
The real impact of that, we don't necessarily know when, if ever, we're going to realize the actual impact of that, because those kinds of details are not ones that they don't expire. They're not things that go away.
No. Once it's out there, it's never gone. And the problem with that, the tragedy of that is that people's lives, not just their livelihoods, are impacted, and it is forever. And the magnitude of this and the number of Social Security accounts that have now been exposed in the 80 to 90% zone.
Yeah, because what is it? I think it's being quoted as between 142 and 143 million. If you take the current population of the U.S., which I think is just in excess of 300 million, you subtract from that people who aren't really old enough to have a credit history yet, people who maybe don't have a credit card, people who are sort of unable to use their credit and stuff like that. You take the remainder, you're pretty damn close to that 142, 143 million. Now, the one part that I don't think has been explained very well is of that count that we're seeing, that count of those millions, is that a reflection of, is each one of those a person who has been affected? Or are those records representative of like a line item monitoring the credit of someone? That's something that I was trying to dig into, and I haven't seen a lot of info on.
They seem to be claiming 140. The number that gets thrown around by the media, which again, you have to, obviously, they can misreport stuff, but the number that's getting thrown is 143 million customers, to which there's other responses to use of the word customer, but again, we'll get there.
No, but I would say that that's people for sure. Those are individuals with livelihoods, with bona fide taxes and Social Security numbers.
Yeah, definitely.
Ooh, brutal.
Thanks,
Cheryl. Timeline-wise, they discovered it on the 29th. Apparently someone from Mandiant, a couple days before the breach was actually disclosed, was registering some domains to try and stop people from domain squatting, to take advantage of this and do some sort of social engineering to maybe get people to enter in their social security number on a website. I don't know, crazy thought. It's overall not a good look for Equifax. The other part of this is, anytime you get a really big public breach like this, you're always going to have, as soon as InfoSec stuff starts hitting mainstream media, things start to get a little weird and things start to get horribly misreported quite frequently. Rob Graham, who I frequently heavily disagree with, but he makes good reasoned arguments. That's the thing about this guy. Even though I politically would never see eye to eye with him, he does make some really great points. In fact, I am going to increase the zoom on this so everybody can read, so people can read, because that would be helpful. Basically, when I had said, consumers or customers, right? If your information is held by Equifax, it's not because they're holding it because you chose them to hold your data. You had no choice in that matter. If you wanted credit, of any sort, really, Equifax has your information, period. It's not, just sort of framing the argument and saying customers sort of makes it seem like people actually had a choice in the matter here, which in today's world, with the importance of credit as it is, we don't really have that choice, right? And so that was something that was kind of, constantly thrown around in terms of how the media framed it. They framed it as, customers of Equifax. Well, you're not. Maybe some people were customers and that they, paid for credit monitoring or something like that. But, ultimately most people in that breach are likely people who have never actually given Equifax a dime for any sort of service.
Who likely have no idea that Equifax even has their data if you've never used their services before. Because one of the things they do offer is, what is it, you get is it 1 or 2 free credit reports a year through either them or a couple of the other entities?
Yeah, or like TransUnion or Experian. Is Experian the other
so
one?
that might have been the only time anybody would ever actually have interacted with this entity in many circumstances anyways. So
the other thing that Rob Graham kind of pointed out is the people very quickly, to me, very surprisingly fast, decided to start saying, well, this hack was specifically due to an Apache Struts vulnerability. So Apache Struts is basically a development framework to essentially, help speed up development time, so you're not building everything from scratch. And frequently in the last couple of years, there's been some really, really bad struts, like script kiddie level remote code execution vulnerabilities. And the thing is that struts is very, very pervasive in terms of how many organizations use it. You'd be hard pressed to find a large enterprise that does not have some sort of struts application somewhere, even just internally. So really huge impact. But the thing is that, there were news outlets that were essentially confirming that the Apache Struts vulnerability was to blame, when the reality was nobody really actually knew that. It was just sort of speculation based on timing, because there were 2 new Struts vulnerabilities announced basically around the same time as the breach. We have to be careful with the reporting, or reporters need to be.
One of the vulnerabilities might have been exploited, but that in no way means that was like the root cause of the intrusion into this organization, right? So you got to be careful labeling it as that. Maybe it was used somewhere along the way as a helping hand, or was part of an overall attack against this organization, but maybe that wasn't necessarily the focal point.
Yeah.
He did make a third point.
Yes, we're gonna get to there. We have a whole thing about that.
All right.
Yeah. It's hard because so many, especially when you start getting into blog posts, the blog posts like to cover sort of several different areas like we're doing right here. So if it seems like I'm kind of skipping stuff in some of the blog posts, it is entirely on purpose. So the other part of handling the breach is all your people in your organization kind of need to be on the same page here. So especially if you're in a customer-facing organization like Equifax, when you've just announced a big breach that is, going to affect easily, 80% of Americans who have a social security number, you should probably make sure that your call center people, even like the basic low-level first-tier customer service people, you should probably make sure that they at least have a script to say during that. Because again, perception, if I call in and I'm trying to find, I don't want to enter in my social security number in this sketchy website, and I want to call in and find out, like, am I potentially affected? Well, when you call in and the customer service people say, I don't know what you're talking about, I'm sorry. That's a problem.
Big problem.
That's a huge problem.
And I believe, so in addition to that, people were either saying, I don't know what you're talking about, or they're just referring them back to the general Equifax website and saying all the information was posted there. It wasn't. And essentially, people were fed up because they've been waiting in those phone mazes for hours, some of them, just trying to get some information.
Well, and so Equifax had set up a special line that was meant to be for the handling breach inquiries specifically. They said it was going to be open 7 a.m. to 1 a.m. and people were calling at like 5:45, and it was basically saying, "Oh yeah, our offices are closed now. Call this line or call back, during business hours." Right? So like they've done nothing right here so far, really. Like they're and it gets better still.
And just
it keeps going.
Really quickly on that phone call center thing, because it's not uncommon. That's not the word I want. There is a very big chance that many people sitting in this room one day will be involved in a position of authority when your organization gets breached, and you're going to remember, oh man, they set up a call center that one time. There are companies who do that. You basically, email them a script. You say, we want like 4 or 5 numbers that people can call. We want like service from this time to this time, and they will basically staff a call center who will read that script to folks that call in. So if you are ever dealing with a breach, please be aware that service is available. It's not super expensive. These organizations do exist to throw stuff like that together very quickly.
Good to know.
Yeah.
All right. So yes, Cheryl.
Yeah.
I'm just going to wait in for 2 seconds.
It's okay.
This is crucial because you've touched on something that most people don't think about until it's way too late, called crisis communications.
Heck yeah.
A vital component. Sorry.
This is about crisis communications, and it's a vital component of incident response, and it's something that nobody really thinks about until they're up to their necks in it. You can plan this in advance. There are services out there. You will be thanking God that you did this, because otherwise you are going to have people saying stuff that you can never pull back at the worst possible time, or not saying the stuff you need to say. Thanks.
Thank you. And it's true. And I mean, I know in the past I've said this a bunch of times, but anytime anybody's ever analyzed the effectiveness of communications in any sort of an incident, they continually show the organizations that recover the fastest and the best are those who are as communicative as possible while still obviously controlling their message, but you want to get out there and start saying stuff as soon as you can. The classic non-InfoSec example that I've mentioned I don't know how many times is the one with Maple Leaf Foods in Canada. What was that, like 6 or 7 years ago now, I think?
That long, eh?
Where there was that, I think there was some kind of infection in the meat. It was like
Listeria or something
yeah,
like that.
something like that.
Something bad.
Anyways, however, like the next day they had their PR team or their PR rep or someone of importance out in front saying, yes, this happened, here's what we're doing to clean it up. Not denying it, not like trying to keep it low. They were there up front with the information. And I'm gonna be honest, I don't think, you know, we saw any like drop in the volume of Maple Leaf products on supermarkets. It's not that there's not other competition, but they just showed that if you're forthcoming in an incident like this with that kind of open communication, it doesn't hurt you. The same thing happened with, what's the note-taking app?
Evernote?
Evernote. When they had their password breach, they didn't even have all the details, and they're
like,
emailing
yeah,
their
by the way,
customers
just so
saying,
you know,
like, yeah,
this happened, we're working on it,
Yeah.
but we want to let you know, just at least taking that, you know, giving that sort of, that first step to say, hey, by the way, we've been breached, you may be affected, but we don't know the extent of it right now,
Yeah.
but at the very least showing that, you know, we're not trying to hide this from you is, I think, really, really incredibly important. Speaks volumes. So yeah, to continue the folly, something that was mentioned earlier was, and I think this was primarily on Twitter, if I'm not mistaken, but Equifax customer service was, this is just like painful. This is so painful to even look at. But basically, the Equifax Twitter account was for like a while reversed security Equifax and Equifax security and was redirecting customers to a fake site that was set up to basically phish people. Now, it was set up by a security researcher, but the fact that like they were just doing that in the first place is horrendous, because if it wasn't a security researcher and it was someone who had literally just cloned the actual Equifax security site, which you can do in Social Engineering Toolkit in about 5 seconds, by the way, and like that could have been made things even more like horrendous than they already are, and they're already really bad. Like, I don't know how this can actually get any worse at this point.
So, in case you didn't see it, the actual site that they registered, which that's a whole other issue. So they registered a domain to handle information for this breach, and it's EquifaxSecurity2017.com, right? And unfortunately,
which right off the bat, I mean, just seems shady as is.
Well, no, I mean, if you're planning on having one major breach a year, you might as well put the year in it.
It's like getting an email. But it's like getting an email from. It's like getting an email from like CEO5654@gmail.com saying, "Oh yeah, you need to transfer $10 million to this account right now."
Yeah, like what was wrong with setting up like a subdomain that was like, you know, databreach.equifax.com? Like, how hard would that have been to do?
I don't know.
Instead, they register a new one and do just flips 2 words, which is, you know, typo squatting in its simplest. Yeah, like a link right off the main page. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, it's and they, like, if you look at the number of tweets, like, it's just like pretty consistent.
The amount of time those tweets were left up, even after people had like direct messaged that Twitter account, had been discussing it, they were left up at times for like longer than a day. when you're being informed that you posted a phishing link instead of the actual breach URL, and it sat there for 24 hours. Like, I don't know what Tim was
All
doing.
posts using the wrong link have been taken down. To confirm the correct website is this. We apologize for the confusion.
Thanks, Tim.
We're sorry. Does anybody watch South Park? The whole BP oil spill. Oh, I actually, yes, forgot to mention that initially the actual domain was getting flagged by browsers as being malicious or being a phishing website. Yeah, they're not wrong, because again, like, we're encouraging people to go to some like Equifax Security 2017.com website and enter in their social security number to see if they're breached. And not only that, but apparently that wasn't even really, it was basically like non-deterministic. When you entered in, if you entered in your social security number on like a regular computer, it would tell you you're affected. And then maybe when you go on your phone and you visit the website and enter the same social security number, it tells you you're not. So again, like, just non-stop ridiculousness here. It's just like, it's crazy. Yes, we got Hillary over there.
Wasn't the site that they were also using kind of just publishing fake data when people put in their social security numbers?
That was kind of what I had briefly read. And that may have led to it sort of seeming non-deterministic, because it was essentially just like, okay, we're going to flip a coin and decide if we're going to tell this person's breach. Because chances are, if we tell them they're part of the breach, we're probably right. Chances are, because this basically affects everyone. So, we'll just make it always return true on this function.
I think it was like if you put the same number twice, and one time it would tell you it was 3.
Yeah, and that was
So
that's someone tried it like on different versions of the site, the desktop and the mobile, which again you'd think it would post the request to the same place each time, right? But who knows? Like,
yeah, so like the initial kind of outbreak of this news, everyone started posting about this, like, go to the site, check your SIN number, or social security number. However, a lot of Canadians tried their SIN number and were also getting the similar thing. And like, they're not even the same number type, right?
How many digits is a social security number?
It did like come out that like 100,000 Canadians apparently have been impacted, and the UK has people impacted.
But they haven't said what exactly the impact has been.
Exactly,
like,
right? Yeah. So this would not fly under GDPR. I'm just saying.
No. All right. But wait, there's more.
There's always
So there's actually, out of this, so the nice thing is sometimes when we get breaches, we do get some really awesome, helpful posts. This one from Rendition InfoSec from Malware Jake on Twitter was actually quite good, and it's actually a really good, concise sort of like, here's how this essentially should have been handled, and obviously wasn't, but here's some good steps. Here's how web application vulnerabilities should have been handled.
Go up. I loved that poll. Like, not that a Twitter poll is super scientific, but so Not Dan asked people, like, which of these 3 do you think is the real, count? And so look at the percentages. Okay, like, maybe people on the whole kind of had a good idea, but like
that's
also they were wrong. But then, like, that's 2,400 votes, and I mean, most people that follow @NotDan are InfoSec people. So like that says something right there about the sheer volume of incorrect selections when you have a pretty like in-touch user base. Like that's terrifying.
Yeah. But basically, this post is actually really good. Part of it's a bit of a sales pitch, obviously, because they want to sell consulting services, as you can tell by the big banner at the top there. But he's basically drawing on not necessarily fully standardized, but frequently taught sort of methodology for incident response. So, he leans on the SANS Institute 6-step incident response process. And, he kind of talks through all that. So, we do get hopefully learn lessons out of some of these breaches. And, thankfully there's people like Jake that come out and write stuff like this. But he has a whole lot of things that could help you potentially prevent this in your organization. Kind of make sure you can check all these boxes. Not that checking boxes does anything for you, but if you can genuinely evaluate these points and say, hey, we do this and we do it well, then you're probably not going to wind up in an Equifax type situation. So yeah, it's good to see stuff like that. Now, we get into now sort of the discussion around who's actually responsible for this, because you got an organization. I think I looked at the Equifax, the number of people they employs. It was like 9,000 or 10,000 people at least they employ. So they're a good sized organization. They're not massive, but they're a good large enterprise, effectively, right? So the first question is, okay, so if let's say they got in through an Apache Struts vulnerability, what responsibility does Apache have? Apache who makes Struts and obviously the Apache web server. So what responsibility do they have? Well, they basically had to come out because they were just being lambasted as saying, it's Struts' fault, it's Struts' fault. And there have been a lot of really bad Struts vulnerabilities in recent time. But if you can point to any framework that has not had serious vulnerabilities.
Like, pick a software vendor. Yeah. They've all had vulns in their code at some point. Like, that is an inevitability.
Basically, say Microsoft has never had a vulnerability.
Yeah. You can't prevent that from happening.
Yeah.
Although I think it's interesting that they're referencing a completely separate vulnerability than the ones that were referenced in other stories. That's a separate CVE number.
Yeah. That was one of the recent ones that came out, though, right? I don't remember the
That one was discussed, I think, around the time that the public disclosure was made.
Right.
But if you look back at
that was the one that started getting exploited within that day of it being released.
But then in Rob's write-up, he pulled a quote from someone who referenced a completely separate vulnerability that started with 5,000, not 9805. So there's also people reporting couldn't fit any of this.
Well, because there have been multiple really bad RCEs this year alone, right?
So that's a whole other issue then.
Yeah. So, but this is kind of a really good one that I've highlighted here. Regarding the assertion that especially this CVE is a 9-year-old security flaw. So frequently we'll hear this about Linux kernel vulnerabilities, for example. We'll hear oh, this is a 12-year-old Linux kernel vulnerability, and because it's existed in the code and in theory is exploitable in all those kernels. Well, they kind of point out, that the software is big and complex, and there's a really big difference between when a vulnerability is, discovered and patched versus when it actually is, sort of discovered and gets exploited. Because very frequently, it's hard to report on, how many unreported 0 days are out there being exploited. But something that's this pervasive, it's kind of hard to keep that really quiet. Unless you're doing some nation state level stuff, which could be a possibility, who knows? But yeah, they essentially had only received notification very recently on the nature of the vulnerability itself. They patched it quite quickly, given how short a period of time that they had. And they bring up some good points. And part of the thing is Struts is a framework. You're building software on top of Struts. So just because, let's put that on silent.
Thanks, John. Solid.
Yeah, no problem. So anyways, so another thing they kind of try to point out is we're building software on top of the framework. So just because you have this framework that maybe handles and abstracts some of the stuff doesn't mean you don't still have to, watch over your software and maintain your software. Just like Apache has to maintain the framework, you have to maintain the software that is built on top of this framework, which includes updating your libraries and updating your frameworks.
Oh, that sounds like a layered approach to security to me.
I give up.
You should do that.
I give up.
You missed me.
Yeah, sure. Well, let's go with that. So anyways, so that's another point. So the question is Apache to blame? I would say strictly no, because all software is going to have vulnerabilities. You can't really do a darn thing about that.
They're as much to blame as any other software vendor is.
Yeah, of course.
Unless they're grossly negligent.
Yeah, there's a difference between gross negligence and, let's say someone dropped an exploit for this and they decided, well, yeah, we're just not going to patch this. That's different. But they did what they could. Given the situation, and I think they're probably okay. So here we have a really lovely blog post from Leslie Carhart, Hacks for Pancakes. She is kind of a really good sort of all-encompassing post, but I want to skip to the one thing that really got me super pissed. And it's this one, and this is what Rob Graham was kind of talking about as well. I'm not going to hold any punches here and say that questioning the qualifications of the CISO of Equifax because she was a music major like 20 years ago when she was in university is utter bullshit and should never even be a discussion. But here we are having this discussion. Mike.
There were no information security programs 20 years ago.
Well, but it's okay.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Well, it's not even okay. But
I've been biting my tongue on Twitter for 2 weeks over that discussion.
Okay,
because
but
you will see.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Because you will see people tweeting that, these degrees have only come up in the last couple of years as InfoSec has become important. You know when this goddamn degree got developed? 20 years ago. It started being offered 15 years ago. But it was developed and built and proposed and written about in public forums with academic commentary, and it was presented at fucking NATO 20 years ago.
Dude, you're old.
I don't take Anyway, so the next time someone in InfoSec says these degrees are brand new, just tell them to come speak to me.
So I'm gonna say I think that's beside the point. I think that is entirely beside the point.
What I was trying to get at is that a lot of people didn't study to become information security professionals. They pivoted to that, right? Because there was a need in the industry, in the world for this. So just because someone went to school for art or geography has literally no relevance on anything post-secondary.
Yeah, that's the point. That's the correct point.
It was insane, and especially she was a woman, right? And a lot of
yes, so this is the other side of it, right?
And that was just like, wow, what is going on here?
Like someone couldn't learn a new skill in 20 years of employment.
Yeah. So
you only ever end up doing what you went to school for.
So I would say it's very highly likely that a lot of that criticism came from the fact that yes, she is female, and therefore, because she didn't actually study technical things, she can't possibly know them because she's a woman, But obviously, that's a huge red herring. However, we have large components of that on the internet, as you all know. If you're ever on Twitter, you will see that constantly. And we have lovely people like that dude with the Google memo who perpetuate those kinds of stereotypes quite frequently. So the other part of this is that, a CISO is not a technical doesn't need to be a technical person. I think Dave Relic, who runs DerbyCon, he was saying that he was a CISO for a short period of time, and he basically said the vast majority of what his job was communicating and making sure that teams were doing things correctly, So Leslie kind of points out some really good things. It is possible for the CISO to perform poorly at her job. So we're not saying that she was necessarily good at her job, but the fact that she was maybe not good at her job had nothing to do with her qualifications per se. So Yeah, that got me really angry, and what killed me was people outside of InfoSec but still in technology and IT and software development and all that kind of stuff. They hopped on this like crazy, and like all over Reddit you'd see this getting upvoted that, oh, she had a music degree. But again, it's just it kind of made me like a little sick just reading all that. So anyways, and again, that doesn't shield her from criticism fully. We can still be critical of the actual work she did or did not do, maybe. But ultimately, we don't know at this point where the fault really truly lies. Ultimately, she had to take responsibility for it, and which is why she's retired now. But that doesn't necessarily make it her fault directly. She's just the one who has to claim responsibility because of the scale of the breach. I think Pavin's got a question there, or something to say.
So, having said all that and the whole degree thing, the one thing you didn't mention, and just it's a very side note, is the fact that what happened after she retired and her online presence, and her LinkedIn is now hidden, last name changed. People are going in and proactively deleting things like YouTube interviews with her. So, we don't know what happened, but that doesn't help.
Well, but it help in terms of the perception
image, right?
that
So,
she's
there's
trying to
all
hide
stuff,
something.
It could be perceived
okay,
that way,
but
right?
let's look at this from the point of view of a woman who's just been outed and is being sort of blamed for one of the largest data breaches to affect every American, right? And then you have this very vocal component on the internet of people that we know will come out with death threats, rape threats, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And just because she's a woman, and especially because they feel that she wasn't technically qualified, so people who are potentially affected by the breach are going to be angry. Then you have that component of those people who are just complete shitheads, right? And to me, I think it's possible, yes, from a perception standpoint, that maybe it doesn't look good, but when you look at it from the perspective of the fact that women get harassed like crazy on the internet all the time, I think you have to have a little more sympathy for that. Personally, that's my thought.
Who hired her? Taking responsibility. Why are they blaming a woman? Why?
Well, so as the CISO.
Why are they hiring someone though that wouldn't have qualifications for it?
Well, exactly. So she's in all likelihood.
Actually, before her LinkedIn profile was taken down, people actually, in defense, started showing, well, look, she's actually been the CISO at a number of
she's been in the game for a while.
She had great security qualifications.
Exactly. So if they obviously hired her for a reason, so why is it her fault? She was the one hired. It's not her fault.
Well, so it doesn't necessarily.
Who hired her?
That's why it was her fault.
So fault is a tricky one. So the thing is because as the person in charge of information security for the entire organization, being the CISO, right? That ultimately, as a breach of this scale, when it comes to especially public perception, you really almost have no choice but to step down. Like at the end of the day, it's that whole realm of security of your entire organization was your responsibility. And in this particular case, regardless of whether it was a woman or a man, they would have had to step down, period. It's unfortunate that the discussion took the direction it did and started sort of attacking her as a woman because, again, people are assholes. So we got more. And see, this is what we want. We want lots of people coming and discussing and saying things. We like it.
We're almost at 8 o'clock.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to respond to what you were saying. I mean, I don't know if you've ever been on 4chan or read the comments of YouTube or something, but it doesn't matter how good or how bad you mess up at something. People will fuck you up on the internet, no matter what, and it has nothing to do with It just happened that the breach made it convenient for them to target something.
It was a new convenient target, right? So, but again, and it's difficult to separate those two things that she may, ultimately from an organizational standpoint and from a business standpoint, she really had to step down. There was really no choice because of the scale of and the nature of the breach. But at the same time, her capabilities should not be questioned because of her academic qualifications or because of the fact that she is a woman. But again, a lot of times people can't separate those because again, they're shitheads.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people agree it's
there's a lot of people who don't seem to care that it's unfair. Yep. Yep.
Okay, so I just want to comment on why she could potentially be blamed, because it's similar in a lot of other cases where a company would fail. The blame usually goes on the top management. And in this case, even if it wasn't exactly directly her fault, the blame would be attributed to her because, in a way, she was in charge of the entire system.
Yeah.
So
again, that's why I like to separate fault and responsibility. Yeah. She had to take responsibility, even if it wasn't directly her fault, right? Yeah. So the thing is that people now, from again, your average public person isn't going to understand the nuances of that, and that's sort of normal, right? When someone takes the fall like that, they kind of expect that that's going to happen, and they're going to get blamed like, oh, it's your fault. When in reality, it could have been some middle manager down the line that, at some point said, well, it's going to cost us too much money and time to patch this right now, so we're going to push this off and delay this, right? And then that decision maybe went to their manager and stopped there, and they said, yeah, that's fine, we don't need to tell anyone about this, right? So we don't necessarily know the organizational complexities to the point of where we can point fault, but in terms of a breach of this scale, when it comes to the corporate world and someone has to take responsibility for it, her being in charge of that realm, it had to be her. There's really no other way. Well, because they still need to operate. They can't just fire everybody.
Yeah, but that's the point that they still need to operate. But like, why blame one woman and then make it all about how she's a female, and then?
Well, so again,
One is put the blame on the whole team.
to clarify though, there was a small vocal segment of people, as frequently happens, that were sort of. That no one ever directly said she was a woman because she messed this up because she was a woman, but it was very clear that the criticism of her degree was spurned by the fact that people felt she was not technically competent, which again, at that position, technical competence is not necessarily that important, to be honest with you. People management becomes way more important, communication is way more important at that level.
it should probably be noted that even if it was a man who was in her position,
they would have had to step down. And I think the criticism would have been different, though. Yeah. That's the reality. The criticism would have been different, but he still would have. Heads would have still rolled, regardless.
So, in the interest of continuing along.
So are we going to continue?
We're approaching the hour mark.
Yeah, we're approaching
no, we can
the hour
continue.
Mark right now we did start a little bit late.
I'll just get more pizza. That's cool.
So we had actually planned to cover like 3 or 4 stories. We'd actually planned to cover 3 or 4 stories, but we're probably just going to leave it at Equifax this time, and maybe keep some of the other stuff for 2 weeks from now.
Sure. So the other things we want to talk about were there's potentially an interesting SEC breach where the Securities and Exchange Council, that's basically like the group that oversees the stock market in the U.S., allegedly hackers broke into there, used a lot of that trading data and forecast data,
and
and merger acquisition data to play the market, make a lot of money.
The information on that is very little, though.
Yeah.
Not a lot to discuss, and it was also buried inside the SEC's like, hey, we're going to talk about cybersecurity. It was buried in there that they had been breached. Of course. Then we were going to talk about the the whole CCleaner thing. That's a big one. We could spend a lot of time talking about that.
That's like the definition of a
So because that is still evolving, information still coming out about that one, I think that's a good one that we may leave till next time. And then Blueborn, which, but Blueborn, there's a lot of nuance to that one too. So anyways, so we're going to take a break. We'll get set up for our panel.
Thanks everyone for your input.
So like 5 minutes. Yeah, thanks for the discussion, guys. Really appreciate it. Maybe like 5-10 minutes, and then we'll be back with our panel. Thanks, guys.
you. Thank you for pizza.
minds of everybody sitting here today once and for all, so everybody has equal opportunity to get into this industry and feel comfortable and at home. That's the idea. So we'll start with introducing the panel. Cheryl, we've got some information about you on the screen, but I'd rather you please tell us, share with us where you work and what you do.
All right, can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right, I'm Cheryl Biswas. If you don't already know me, I go as Encrypted on Twitter, and currently I work with a boutique offensive security firm called Secura, and that's just a recent change. I was with KPMG for about a year and a half, and then prior to that I was with a managed services group and started the security position with them there. Good enough?
Perfect, that was awesome, thank you. And Jeff, could we please ask you to share where you work and what you do there?
Sure, my name's Jeff Chow. I'm a Sheridan ICT grad. I work for Deloitte's managed security service provider. It's called the Cyber Intelligence Center. I manage the infrastructure team there. Get to work with Clinton pretty often, so that's great.
He sounded so excited about that.
Thank you, Jeff. Laurie, if we could please ask you to introduce yourself, where you work and what you do there.
Yeah, my name is Laurie Chan. I currently work at Bell Canada. My title is, I think, Senior Security Solutions Consultant, or something like that. Basically, what I do is I'm on professional services side, so we get approached by customers with certain network security requirements, and we go in and we basically deploy them. So anything network security related is generally what we work with.
Thank you, Laurie. And Mike, if we could please ask you to introduce yourself to everyone.
Sure. I'm Mike Mello. I work for a proprietary trading firm. I'm their information security officer. We are headquartered out of Chicago, but I obviously work here in Toronto. Person to blame if we get breached. Yeah, and essentially I run our entire information security program at our company.
Perfect, thank you very much. And Desiree, I'm so sorry I don't have your bio in here. I was going to put a ninja's picture there, but I decided not to. I didn't have your permission. So if you could please share where you work and what you do there.
I'm Desiree McCarthy. I'm also a Sheridan graduate from Information System Security Program. I've been working at Security Compass as a consultant for, in total, a little under 2 years. So I mainly do pen testing there. That's it.
Thank you, Desiree. And I don't need to go into details why I'm not one of the panelists.
But you should probably introduce yourself.
My background initially was in computer science. That was my first degree. The second one is information system security, which is the program some of you guys are in right now. And my hope is that through these discussions, you guys can form a really nice network. And if you ever attend John's very first presentation at the beginning of each year, it tells you how small the security industry really is. It will give you an appreciation that you might hate somebody in this room, but that person tomorrow will be asked, how is this person, by the way? Can I hire him? So I just want to give you guys an appreciation. But
you can watch that on YouTube if you missed it, by the way.
Excellent. So please ask John for the link if you haven't had a chance. If you are new to the industry, there are certain very interesting things about this industry that you should know before you go into the market, in addition to who you should know to get into the right position of your liking. So the very first question I have for the panel, and we'll start from Mike, far right. What do you love the most about InfoSec? It's a little bit open kind of question, so please feel free to answer whichever way you please.
Okay. What I love most about InfoSec? I would have to say the variety. You know, I've been privileged to be the leader of my company's information security program. So that involves a lot of great privilege, but also a lot of challenge, right? And that's it's given me a lot of experience and openness to a lot of different technology and growth So I think my favorite part about InfoSec is the constant change and, you know, the day in and day out grind of it.
Thank you. Jeff, if we could please ask you to answer the same question. What is it that you love the most about InfoSec?
Sure. Mine's definitely still based on the variety, mostly on the people rather than the technology. It might be a little bit too soon to make a joke about having a music degree, but it is nice having people from various backgrounds. You know, quite often we're looking at solving solutions that haven't been solved before. So it's nice to have, you know, input from someone that necessarily doesn't have the same background as you or the rest of the team.
Perfect, thank you very much. Laurie, if we could please ask you the same. What's your favorite thing about InfoSec?
For me, I'd say it's interesting being not quite on the cutting edge, but close enough to be cops and robbers in some sense of seeing how the industry has kind of evolved from what used to be, you know, you watch like the old movies of, what is it, Hacker with Angelina Jolie, and then you see how it's evolved now. So what you see is the latest and greatest now in 6 months could very well be obsolete, and you gotta find out what, you know, the next thing is. And, you know, being a woman in this industry is kind of nice because when you work at a big firm and there's not a lot of women on the floor, then you get your own bathroom. So that's very
Wonderful, thank you very much, Laurie. Cheryl, if we could please ask you the same question. What is it that you love about InfoSec?
It's twofold for me. Number one, it's the learning. The learning is exhilarating. Every day, I fell down the rabbit hole of Twitter when I discovered this place, and I have not come back up since. You can learn until your brain explodes, which I will never get tired of, and you can't get tired of because there's always something more to learn. And the second part is the community, the people here. We share this information, we teach each other, we bring each other up. I have never seen anything like this, and I've been around for a lot longer than most of you, and it is amazing.
Thank you, Cheryl. Desiree, I know you're new to the industry, but I'm sure you've got your favorites already. If you could please share with us.
Yeah, sure. So I guess especially as someone who's relatively new to the industry, it would be all the people who are smarter than me. And I guess I say this at my job, but also just in the community as a whole. There's nothing better than being surrounded by people who really know their niche very well. And you could listen to them for hours about what they're passionate about. I love people who are passionate about what they're doing. It's a kind of seeing the exhilaration they get from talking about that is one of my favorite things. So I would say that it's all the smart people in this industry who I really respect a lot.
Excellent. I love how nobody said money. That's kind of my favorite thing about this industry.
I'm going to interject with like a little comment. The people who are in it primarily for the money tend not to last very long.
That is very true, but you'll enjoy the money all the same.
Yeah, it's a nice perk. You don't need to say it's a nice perk. I'm not saying it's not good. But.
Yeah. Anyway, the reason why I say that is that I want to give you guys good news. If you're not in the industry yet, this is one of those lucky programs where you graduate and you get a really fantastic starting salary at most places. And if you don't, you can negotiate it within a year or two. We'll move on to the next question just to go through these really quickly. And again, I really appreciate the panel keeping the responses very right length. So please go right ahead and share with us. Mike, we'll come back to you. Okay. Any challenge that you may have encountered that you would like to share with the students here, please?
Sure. I think, you know, one of the biggest challenges in InfoSec is essentially where does it fit in the business model, right? Where does it fit in the business? You know, it's a very rapidly evolving, you know, entity of itself. And business types don't necessarily understand it yet, right? And information security professionals don't necessarily understand how business entity works either, right? So I feel like there is a big disconnect there, and there needs to be some sort of harmonization between the two to really, you know, push forward and evolve as a whole and line security up with business initiatives and intertwine the two while the company is growing.
fantastic. That's a great answer. Jeff, if we could please ask you to comment on a challenge this industry faces or you may have faced in this industry.
Sure. I find the biggest one is definitely enabling businesses to simply do the basics better. If you look at Equifax or WannaCry, patch your shit. Pretty good start. But even going beyond that, like even simpler things like can an organization track their assets? Like a lot of you will be doing some sort of risk assessment of a company in a few years, and you'll find out, hey, do you know what you have? And they'll give you a list from 2006, or they'll give you a list from the last time they were audited. And frankly, it's scary as hell. So just going back to the basics. Don't run with scissors, stuff like that.
Sorry, thank you. I did talk to a company the other day. They said the last pen test they had was 4 years ago. So yes, he's spot on. It's exactly right. Lori, if we could please ask you to share a challenge you may have encountered being in the InfoSec world.
I would say it's people/users. The main thing is there's a lot of potentially misinformation out there, as we know, and there's also, in terms of users, someone says, oh, it's easy to secure a system, but when you're in this industry, it's not as easy because human beings are always the weakest link. And because of that, you also have, as Mike kind of alluded to, you have the business who doesn't really understand why we need security until, shit hits the fan, in some sense. And then you have others who realize this, but because of that disconnect, the people who know that they need the security, they ask for money, and then, the people who control the money say, forget it, it's not worth it, doing their own various risk assessments until, like I said, something happens, so.
And just to support Roy's point, there's a company that got hacked and their revenue went up so high and CEOs were laughing. And I'm not making this up. It was a strange use case, strange business case where the popularity of that company on the internet, instead of the money business going down, a lot more people came on just to check them out. So that is the unfortunate truth. Cheryl, if we could please also ask you, sorry? Cheryl, if we could please, I will not confirm or deny that, but if we could please ask you for a challenge you may have encountered being in the InfoSec world.
Sure. This is a challenge that most people are going to find, and it's communication. Communication is a soft skill. It's something that I'm really good with, and I speak several languages. You will find yourself having to speak to diverse groups of people at various levels of technical capability, business being one of them, and being able to justify your existence in the language of risk, and then working with end users and finding the way to explain terms to them without dumbing it down. It will be a constant challenge.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And actually, I've seen Cheryl in other venues where she's talked to different kind of audiences, and she really does have a fantastic way of translating the InfoSec world to people who don't speak the same language as us. Thank you, Cheryl. Desiree, if we could please ask you to share if you have a challenge in the first 2 years of your career.
Sure. So I guess my answer comes purely from like a pen tester point of view. I've never been like on the blue team side, but from what I have seen, it's maybe a bandwidth problem or a prioritization problem or a security team is so overworked problem. But I know, Sarah, you mentioned, and you kind of laughed about a company that hasn't been pen tested in 4 years. Well, it's one thing to get that pen test, like that's great, but when you go in, you do a pen test on an application, for instance, and the next year you do a pen test on the same application, and you see all the same vulnerabilities, and then you sort of have to take a step back, like, is this valuable to them? They haven't fixed these things. Sure, they're getting their pen test done every year, but their security team is obviously overwhelmed. They haven't fixed anything. So I think sort of the bandwidth and prioritization might be an issue. Well, it's the biggest issue that I've seen, at least.
Wonderful, thank you very much. We'll move on to the next question. In the interest of time, we're going to pose a very strange question. It's not even a question. So I love how the last segment, the news segment, ended with a little bit of blood pressure running high. And I love the comment our audiences made. So now I'm just going to open the discussion among the panelists to make a comment on the fact that women, I would say, most in this room would agree, and studies also show, are underrepresented in this industry. do you have any, I'm not asking you a straight question, so if you have any thoughts on the subject, Mike, if you can comment on that alone.
Sure. Absolutely. They are underrepresented, and they have been for a long time in all industries, right? In all aspects of life. Like women's rights movement was a big thing. We are starting to see more women in IT in general, which is great, that there's an adoption to that, there's, equality, and now we're starting to see, more women in information security and people, welcoming them into the information security realm as an equal, right? But then you still have some who don't treat them as such, right? And that's a hard hurdle, I guess, to really change, right? I don't know how you go about changing that, except just trying to make people aware that, women can do the same job as men and better or just as good, right? There is really no difference.
Yeah, that's true. Thank you very much. Jeff, if we could please ask you to comment. You can even disagree, to be honest. I mean, I'll have 10 studies pulled up in no time, but please, if I could have a comment on the fact that women are underrepresented in this particular sector.
Sure. Fortunately for me, I've been working for organizations that have always had a strong female representation. I think this room alone is pretty good representation, like even up here. Women, keep doing your thing. And if you ever find yourself working for a place that isn't able to, make things happen, or it's just not the way it should be, just don't work there. So.
Perfect. That's fantastic. If it's not the place for you, if the environment isn't ready, you have options, especially in this particular sector. If there are problems you just cannot resolve, then absolutely you have many options. Laurie, in your experience, I'm going to use the word being a woman in IT security, do you have any comment on the subject?
So I would kind of disagree with Jeff, just because looking around, this is a really, really good ratio of women to men that I'm seeing.
Honestly, we've been running sessions for just over 2 years now. This is probably the most women I've ever seen in this room, to be honest with you. Like, hands down. Just as an example, 2 weeks ago, the only female in the room was Alana. So,
Thank you, guys. Cheryl, if we could please ask you to comment on the fact that women, in fact, are not equally represented in the InfoSec world.
Sure. Okay, I discovered InfoSec maybe 3 years ago, and it's been a whirlwind. I now head up a conference called an initiative that addresses this specifically down in Vegas during the week of Black Hat and DEF CON. We have people who put in talks, who want us to be there because they feel so strongly about it. But my own experience, I'm glad I don't listen to what people say because I wouldn't be here otherwise. But my boss, when I said, I'd like to get a network certification, looked at me and said, no, you're better in skirts and we need you to talk to the clients.
My goodness.
He had no idea what came out of his mouth. I knew exactly how it impacted me, and I shared that with a friend and made things move in a very different direction. But I understand clearly what it feels like not to be taken seriously. This I do from a passion. I have never loved anything as much as what I've discovered in InfoSec, and I'm not going to stop. And so for me, a big part of my purpose is to get that message out there to anybody who wants to do this. It is fantastic, it is rewarding, and we want you here.
See, I actually have a different experience from you. I never went through that, but maybe it was just me and my background, because I always grew up around computers, so I was always interested in looking at computers, taking them apart, and seeing how they worked and everything. So when I actually went to university, the first time around, I actually wanted to do something in security, but they didn't have any programs. So I was like, all right, I'll go into the closest security-related program I had, which essentially meant they had one security course, and that was in cryptography, and that was it. So I was like, oh, okay, so this isn't quite what I want to do, but I'll just go along with it. And then after that, I found for me, maybe I was just the opportunity, right timing and everything, but I found it was beneficial to be a woman in this industry, because nowadays all these companies realize, hey, we need to, not have women as minorities, or we have to, fix the ratio and whatnot. So you actually have a better opportunity than a guy, because as soon as HR sees, oh, it's a woman, you're already at the top of the list right there. Like, that's it. And then usually at that point, so you already have a heads up. And usually if you're really good and you kind of work hard, then you'll find you can make it to the top fairly easy compared to, because it is a male-dominated industry at this point in time.
That's a great comment. Thank you. We're just going to give Desiree a chance, and we'll come right back to you, Mike. Desiree, do you have any comment on the fact that women are not in equal representation at this time?
Sure. So I guess it is a fact that they're underrepresented when you compare to the population. I don't claim to have all the answers as to why, and I've never been a guy, so I don't know what it's like. I don't know what your experience has been, but my experience has been good, and I feel that a lot of the problems disappear when it's a lot of it is a company culture thing. If your company doesn't hire jerks, then the problem almost disappears completely. So just don't hire jerks.
Just ask them in an interview. Come on, be straight with me. Are you a jerk?
Are you a jerk? I'm just trying to emphasize that the cultural component of interviews is really important.
Yeah,
it's not
and that's
just,
hard.
It is hard.
It's hard to interview for that.
I think my company does it fairly well, based on my experience, but it is difficult, and it's just as important, if not more important, than the technical interviews.
Perfect, thank you. So there's 4 things that are very important here. Cheryl said that if you have the passion, and I will say, doesn't matter if you're a guy or a girl, if you have the passion for what you're learning here, nothing is going to stop you. That's my promise to you. Second is that you can't just stop because of an incident. And that I'm saying particularly to the women in the room, if there is an incident, there are ways to resolve it and move forward from it and find a different environment if you cannot resolve it. So what I would say is the women in this room may not openly share all our actual experiences from years and years, but one thing we all have in common is it did not stop us from moving our careers forward. So that's one thing I just want, and I have to apologize for the image. We don't all look like this in the IT world. If you're a woman, you're not going to walk around wearing a dress. I mean, it's not on purpose.
Unless you're trying to social engineer your way into somewhere. In this case,
I
that's
have a
probably
red
pretty
dress
effective.
for that, exactly. So he's spot on. And simple thing is, there's a place for every single one of us in the industry. And I have to recall the person that created this program, and we'll give you a chance, Mike. Sorry, I'm just closing this for a second. The person who created this program from scratch, I remember talking to him exactly 20 years ago. And I asked him the question, this is Victor Radlich I'm talking about. I asked him the question, and I asked the same question of my first employer, who was the great-grandson of the person that discovered insulin, Canadian hero. Both the people had one comment. I asked them, I'm like, it's kind of hard being the only girl on the entire IT floor. And it was true 20 years ago, and they said, so what? And that was it. I said, so what? Being the only girl should not stop you. So I would say that if you're the only admin, if you're the only pen tester, if you're going to find yourself in a small team in most of the organization, if you have a unique role and you find yourself doing things differently from the rest, you're in the right industry. So we need characters, essentially. So if you feel a little different, please feel that we all feel a little different in this role, because our jobs are different from the jobs of 20 years ago. Mike, if you can please share your comment.
Yeah, sure. So I just wanted to touch base on the comment about how, moving your resume to the top of the list because you're a woman, and it's unfortunate that that's the case, right? It's unfortunate that that's the case, that you are perceived as a buffer, essentially, by HR and other people, when it's not actually your skill that they're truly looking at for a job role, right? I hope that one day we can move towards that environment where, we are hiring people not based on gender. We're still working on the whole racial thing too, right? So there's still change, but as Cheryl's mentioned, this community is amazing. Like, you will never find such a more involved and connected community of people. So don't be afraid, and as we mentioned, incidents do happen, but there's someone always out there who will have your back.
So we actually are into the Q&A session. Unless the panelists have another comment on this topic in particular, what we're going to do, I'll wait for you guys. Do you have anything else you want to add before we move on to the Q&A?
I have a thick skin.
Okay.
Because it is more male dominant, you have to have a thicker skin, not be so easily offended, because the camaraderie that the guys have, some of their jokes and pranks and all this other stuff is not the most appropriate, depending on obviously how big of a company you are. But usually the more information security companies are more kind of niche, smaller size companies. So guys who kind of like to play pranks on each other and all this other stuff, it's just, I find maybe it's just in this industry or the companies I've been at, but it's just more of their way of letting out steam and whatnot. And it's one of those in some sense of, if you can't hack it and, they perceive you as just always complaining, it's not really going to look good on you either, even though they may not be acting in the most professional manner. But it's, in some sense, that's the way it is. It's not, I wouldn't say, if you kind of look around, nobody's exactly the most, business presenting to, a business person. Everybody has their own quirks and characteristics. So, yeah, that's the only thing.
That goes for guys too.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Two things. One is, this is a funny industry. We love to tell everyone, if you bring down a production server while you're doing a pen test, we love to tell each other. There are places on the internet that no one else knows about. The InfoSec industry is constantly talking to each other. It's okay. You're going to get made fun of in the first year. Chances are high. I still do. I still find myself in situations when my colleagues will say, oh, you did this? Oh, really? Ha ha ha. And we just have to go with it. That's just the hard truth. However, the connected part, that's the part I would like to reiterate. It's a small group of people in GTA. Chances are I'm going to run into at least 50% of you at some client site within the 5 years. You all are. So that's exactly, you're among people who are going to make things easier for each other. So go easy on each other. That would be my advice to everybody, including the women and the men in the room. And I see some questions brewing. So I think we'll go for the audience to start asking questions. You can direct your question at a particular panelist, or you can ask them all.
Or if you just want to make a comment, that's fine.
That too.
So I have the conch. I get to speak. No, I'm just going to echo what Mike said. I wholeheartedly 100% agree with her, in the sense that I've got 15 and a half years in the dang courses. I've got 6 years now in information security and software development. And I can tell you from personal experience on when I was in the military and the integration with women on particular ships and the challenge that we were faced when dealing with that and continuing to deal with that it's not just InfoSec, it's pretty much, across all sectors. The question though, and it's not, I guess it's almost rhetorical, but at the same time it's, posed to anyone on the panel who wants to answer the question, is how do we get women more involved in information security as an interest in getting involved in the first place? How do we get them to join this ISSes program and deal with computer science before even dealing with all the politics of office space, male, female, gender, or racial issues? I think that might be more of a bigger question that needs to be answered.
Yeah, we'll get Cheryl to answer first.
Okay. We've been trying to go in through addressing it at the college and high school levels for women who are going in, or for girls who are going into those grades as a technical pursuit. But I would recommend looking at the social sciences and presenting this as a great way to bring your interest and evolve it, because a lot of people, myself included, had no idea what we could do with our interests that were much bigger than the one topic area where we were. It's a fantastic arena of people to glean from. We bring communication, we bring soft skills, and we bring a passion for learning. And we just happen to be, have this great side of us that is into technology and geeky nerdiness that we can't stop learning.
So is it possible that we could even go further than that and not just introduce at the high school level, but even at the elementary level? Because it's like, even when I was growing up, girls play with Barbies and boys play with, G.I. Joes and Tonka cards. There's a segregation in what women and men or boys and girls can do at that age, and they're not given the same opportunities then, which carry on to now.
Grade school robotics clubs. Boys and girls both love them, and boys and girls play so well together at that age.
I absolutely agree, but where does it, I guess the question is, where does it switch off? And maybe that's where we could address the issue and try to get more women involved. And I don't know if there's an answer to that.
So Mike, if I could please have you respond?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's a great point. I truly believe that we need to break that stigma, right? Like what you can and cannot do based on your gender, right? At no matter what age. But I think where it's coming down to is, it's still a stigma on all levels, at all ages, everywhere. And the biggest thing I think that is a hurdle is schooling and connecting with your peers and being perceived as part of the group, right? And people trying to step up and be unique and do their own thing. It's hard to own that. It's hard to be different. And that's currently what the state is, right? Because it's not a widely adopted thing yet. So I think the stigma needs to be broken down on all levels and be supported by everyone, from the upper echelons of business to the younger generations, like anyone who is anyone. That's where I think it needs to be a collective change.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mike. We have two questions. One is at the top right, second is here, and third is there. Guys, we can see you.
Yeah, actually, we got multiple here.
So we'll start at the top, because I saw that hand go up a few times. And we'll try and speed up the questions, because we've got 10 minutes.
Being a female in this profession, honestly, so I've graduated from social service work. I've worked in the field. I've dealt with people with mental health issues. I have mental health issues of my own. Honestly, being in this field, not knowing anything about computer programming until last September, a lot of people are really surprised when I'm like, hey, by the way, I'm in computer programming. Just by looking at me, they judge, and they think that I'm this chick who doesn't know anything about computer programming, but when I start talking, they're like, holy crap, she knows what she's talking about, just by what she studied. Honestly, the men who have, not just men, but anyone who's judged me, mostly men, as of just tonight, it happened just tonight, I was trying to offer my help for something that I noticed, and I got shut down because I am female. And it's not the first time that's happened with this particular person, and it's not the first time it's happened by anyone. It's happened before with other people. It's the lack of confidence that certain people have, in particular with women. They don't believe that women have this chance of being great. Also, we have these skills, and there's proof up there. There's 4 women sitting up there and 2 men at the moment, and that just shows you that there's already been an improvement on the people, or on women, or people allowing women or to be in this program, to let them shine, to let other people realize that they have the skills also. Just because they're women doesn't mean they're not human, doesn't mean they don't have a brain, doesn't mean anything, that they can't function the same way a man can. And honestly, if there was more confidence in us women, or us people as a whole, as a collective, that we can work together, honestly, it would be better, and there'd be more women in this program instead of shocked faces and surprise. And I don't like the surprise. It's cool, but it's not cool. I'd rather be looked at as someone who has the skills for this kind of stuff, instead of being judged because I'm female, how I dress. Everyone has the skills, and it's about promoting that everyone has those skills. If we sit here and say that, that I can't perform, or she can't perform because she's female, or because how she's dressed, or how she looks because she's got blonde hair or whatever. It doesn't really matter. Like, you should just look at their resume, look what's on paper, look what their skills are, look how they present themselves, how they talk. Look at those things, not their facial features or their skin color or anything like that. It's about lack of confidence. Like, where's the women power? Where's the confidence in women? Like, I don't know.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. I love what you said. It's cool but not cool. So before we take comments from the panel, we're just going to try and see if you have a question as well.
Oh, I had more a kind of a question and also a response to what Steve might said. So I find equally important as addressing like where in education do we start the thinking about this for like young girls. It's also just as important to address how us who are already grown up address like this issue, because I find that a lot of the time, and especially because, you know, a lot of us have been on the internet, we grew up with computers and we come from internet culture, there's this idea that like, oh, we're talking about women's issues, they're complaining again. But there's actually a whole social field, an academic field that addresses exactly how, you know, the economic, the political, the biopolitical, the everything that happens in society is a reflection of how everything is innately gendered. And I find it so frustrating because even when we're on Twitter, I see other women in my field being like, oh, but like everything's not about gender, but it's like actually, well, you know, gender roles were conceived from like hunter-gatherer times. That's where they started. It's actually like part of everything we do. And I think, you know, even myself, I used to hate feminism because I was like in that environment where like people would whine about, oh, like, you know, men are this and that, and I hated it. But then when I came to actually study sociology, I was like, holy shit, like people actually made this like a legitimate field that actually analyzes these differences. And you know, it always, people say they don't want to hear about this like whininess and stuff, but I think a lot of people forget it wasn't even 100 years ago when women weren't considered people, and that's only if you were white. And I think, again, you know, we need to address when they're young girls, but how do we actually teach this in a convincing way to the people who already have these social norms and mores already like ingrained in them? Because again, a lot of people just want to shut down the moment you mention gender, and we need to get through to them and like tell them like, no, it's actually a factor that is very completely relevant to like everything we experience in this society.
Perfect. Those are two very amazing comments, and I feel like we vented a little bit today. So I feel really good about that. But what I want to do.
Any more? Yes, go ahead.
Sorry. So anyways, my question though is how can we actually project that into our industry? What can we do?
That's exactly what I want to ask the panel, because we have 5 minutes left. What I want.
Yeah.
We can go.
Keep it going.
We're here till 10, technically.
Yeah. So we'll go 9:10.
It's the panelists, so the ones who might have lives, unlike everything.
Fair enough.
Sorry, hold on. We're in InfoSec. InfoSec is life. Okay?
Perfect. All right, so we will take another question then.
So my question is regarding the glass ceiling that Bill talked about. I wanted to know that in your experiences and what you sort of seen in InfoSec, if the problem is any better or any worse.
Mike, do you want to comment first? Something you may have observed?
So what are you referring to as glass ceiling?
The glass ceiling, that sort of barrier, the invisible barrier that they talk about that prevents women from reaching the tops of organizations or departments.
Well, Equifax had one. Just saying. No, yeah, it is still innate, right? It's still that gender perception, right? There is nothing saying that women can't be the upper echelon of companies, right? Like, I don't agree with all this hate, right? I don't understand why there's people who actually think you're a woman, you're inferior. You know, you can't do this. This is a man's job. I don't even understand that. You know, like I just can't even wrap my head around how people can truly believe in something like that. You know, and that goes for a lot of other things too, right? But yeah, on the specific topic of women, I don't know how we go about, breaking that ceiling or, I guess it's just every person can just do better themselves, right? And try to inspire others by, your actual actions and, how you show your perception of women and how they are equal to you, and not judged based by their gender.
Awesome, thank you. Jeff, can I ask you to comment on almost like an advice to the girls and women in this room? What can they do if they run into some sort of barrier, some sort of issue? What would help them move past that issue in this industry?
Sure. I'm absolutely a huge advocate for having a mentor of some sort, whether it be like a life mentor or a career mentor. Have someone that can always provide you advice, someone that kind of ground you. Having someone that you can trust and has experience honestly puts you far ahead of many other people. It's especially hard when you're first starting. That the working world is a very different dynamic. Coming out of that from school, there's a certain level of competition, but then going into when the money comes into it, when your career comes into it, and really money is an enabler to many people's lives. Just have someone you can really trust in and really confide in. And actually, I wanted to make a quick point on what we're talking about how to sort of deconstruct some of those barriers from a young age. I think a lot of the initiatives towards getting competitive sports for kids, both sexes together, I think that's a great way to start out. From a young age, we'll break down that sort of social construct as to what the physical limitations are or what the physical differences are between the sexes. And then, competitive sports they also very align with what the working world is like. There's a certain hierarchy, there's a certain level of who's who, and I think those really early lessons will help out later in life.
Perfect, that's wonderful, thank you. Lori, do you have any suggestion or any advice for the women in the room in case they run into any unforeseen issues in this industry?
Quit your job and move somewhere else.
Just kidding, guys, just kidding.
Well, I'm half kidding because what I've seen is, there's a huge demand for one thing, and because you're in some sense a minority, there's always going to be people wanting you because you're a minority. And you could look at it as a bad thing of, we're not treated equal, but at the same time look at it as an opportunity of, hey, they're looking at, 20 resumes and you're the only girl there potentially. So, you just got bumped up, way in advance. And if you can prove your skills, then that will get you far. Because you can say, okay, I work at this company, they suck, they don't treat me right, they're racist or whatever else you want to say, then, then maybe it's not the company for you and just move somewhere else. Just hack it out, stick around just to get the skills and then just turn around and start looking for work elsewhere. And as someone mentioned of you do have potentially the stigma of you'll have colleagues who don't respect what you do and, you try to suggest something and they don't listen to you, then, hey, if they don't want to listen to you, then they don't want to listen to you and kind of move on in some sense, right? Because if you guys are, say, a good example for me is in one of the situations I was in was we're basically working as a team, and usually everybody works on a different issue. I'm talking about actual technical issue. Usually when you're in that kind of a mentality and you got CEOs and upper management sweating down your back trying to say, we need this fixed now, you don't care who the help comes from, you just need help to get it done and move on, right? If you have someone who's kind of no, I don't want your help, then they're basically just shooting themselves in the foot because potentially you could tell them how to fix it in 10 minutes and they're spending 2 hours. And when you have, upper management saying, how come it took you 2 hours to fix something, they're kind of and, they don't have much of a response except for, I didn't want to accept that person's help. And if that's the case, and potentially in the back of their head, it's kind of well, maybe I should have accepted that person's help. And, the next time around, same issue, then they're definitely going to be accepting your help at that point, right? So it's basically you, in some sense, you just have to prove yourself and have a thick skin and be confident in your own skills. And if you're not confident in your own skills, then get confident, start reading, books and everything to get yourself confident. And yeah.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So one thing I can probably ask Desiree, Cheryl, and Lori to think about, are you guys comfortable being in an environment where you are almost always one or two of the women in the room and the rest of them are guys? Cheryl said no. So
No. I've always been.
Oh, sorry, I saw your head shaking.
Yeah,
So,
no, that's what I'm used to, and I do very well by it.
perfect. So this is something I want you guys to understand, that in this industry, you will get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Whether you're a guy or a girl, if you're a consultant or you're a pen tester, there is discomfort in risk. We deal with the business of risk, and it comes from different kind of angles. What I want to ask my panel now, if you guys can tell us something a little unconventional, some sort of tactic, something creative to the students to make their way into the industry. Now this is a little bit more not gender specific. This is more for everybody in the room. Something you can tell them, some advice that is not only applicable to women in the room. Career hacks. Something about this industry, that some juicy detail you can give these folks. They go home and say, yes, I got this little piece of information, this is going to go a long way. And we'll actually start with Desiree, because she's new in the industry and she may have seen things and she still has a fresh take on things. Desiree, is there some advice you can give everyone?
This is probably going to be pretty tired of advice, but just start meeting people, go to conferences, go to the, maybe not even the conference itself, but the drinking event after the conference. I kind of fell into my job, I guess, because I did my co-op there. So I guess I don't have a juicy tidbit of advice for that. But when I did go to Sector before I did my co-op, just by the fact of me being there and me talking to people, I already had a couple people say, oh, you're going on co-op next year. Well, I have a job guaranteed for you co-op wise if you contact me later. So I guess that's my advice, is just get to know people, especially if they prefer drinking.
That's a solid advice. Just be known. Go to places and have your face be easily recognized in the industry. That's actually fantastic advice. Maybe John and Nick can weigh in on what kind of events do you think students should be going to? She mentioned Sector, where the expo ticket is free, by the way, if you sign up in time. Sector is one of the largest, I would say, business and security conference. It's got a blend of both. It's
Certainly
not
the largest one in this country.
Largest one in this country.
Besides Toronto, to me, is one of the best places to go to because it's small, it's very community focused, it's inexpensive, you can afford it on a student budget very easily, and because of the small and sort of community focused nature of it, you can't help but be in close proximity and talk to people and get introduced to people. And I would really say, if you can, go with someone you know, because it's a little bit easier, because that person will know people you don't. They'll introduce you to people who will introduce you to other people. The network effect is crazy in this industry.
Absolutely. And people talk about you when you're there 5-6 times. They start coming up to you because they recognize you. Cheryl, do you have a career hack for the students in the room?
Sure. Submit a talk. Go out on a limb.
Submit talks to us.
Legitimately, I started with, besides Las Vegas has a great mentoring program, and I put it in, and they said yes. It was remarkable. And they actually subsidized my costs to get down there. So nothing is impossible. I had no money. I went down there with cereal bars. It all worked out great. However, to encourage you, besides Toronto, is local. It's a great community of people to get involved with. We've also got the local DEF CON chapter, DC 416. We've also got TAS Toronto. They ask for monthly contributions. You can get up there, you can talk. It's a great experience for you. It connects you to a local group of people, and there are a wealth of opportunities that will come out of it. And it will boost your confidence.
Wonderful. Thank you, Cheryl. Lori, do you have a hack for the room?
I'd say one is obvious, hopefully you guys are from the ISS program.
Not everyone.
Not really?
Whatever.
Well,
Can
do
I-
you guys get
yeah.
co-op, hopefully? If you guys get co-op, depending on how much co-op you get, if you guys get like, I don't know, 8 months or a year or something, I would advise trying 3 different jobs or 3 different companies each time, just to widen your network a little bit and to hopefully potentially explore that into a job opportunity, rather than you like this first company you went with and you just stuck it out with them for 8 months, because then you potentially lose out on an opportunity to gain more knowledge with another company is the first thing. The second one, is I would say no matter how stupid it looks, because you're just starting out, ask as much questions as you want and as you can. Like, just hammer people around you, because they all have more experience than you. They would know more than you right off the bat. So just ask as many questions as you can, no matter how stupid it is. Now, the exception to that is don't ask the same question twice, because you're going to piss everyone off, and they're just going to realize, like, 1, you don't know anything, or 2, you're not willing to learn on your own, of basically them giving you a tidbit and you going out on your own and trying to, extrapolate more information from that little bit of, headway.
So Google it first, right?
Yes. Google first and ask second.
Absolutely. Jeff, do you have any funky advice for the room, something that might help the students break their way into this industry?
One sort of half hack. I'm hiring for co-ops and full-time. That's a good start. The other one's going back to the fact that we work in business risk. At the end of the day, no matter what you're doing at work, remind yourself that we are managing risk. Everything should be business oriented. Money in, money out. That's frankly what it is. So.
Wonderful. And last but not least, Mike, if you have any advice for the room.
Sure. I got a couple points. First one is never stop learning. Never become complacent, right? You can't. There's too much knowledge out there for you to just be involved with it. Another one I'd have to say is don't be afraid, right? It might seem like a big scary world. There might be like a ton of people who are like brainiacs. You might talk to people who are just really brilliant in certain things or really brilliant in everything. Or you may talk to people who are just like you, right? Don't be afraid to interact with people. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to go to conferences. Don't be afraid to challenge yourself, right? And I think my last point is, try to understand what it is that you're doing, right? Try to give yourself a general roadmap of where you want to go, and don't be afraid, again, to pivot, right? Information security is very vast. There's pen testing, there's blue teaming. There's you can be a SOC engineer, software developer, like anything, right? So don't be afraid to pivot. Keep an open mind and tough skin. Guys or girls, doesn't matter. Noobs or experts, trolls are everywhere. We all know this.
And sometimes they sit on the board.
Exactly, right? And don't get discouraged. Don't ever get discouraged. Keep going. Don't stop.
So I have to clarify, the reason why the whole panel is saying don't feel discouraged, have thick skin, it is a little tough. No one said anything of value came super easy. You don't become a doctor by just going to school for 1 year. You don't become an information security specialist by just studying it for 4 years. It's a great start. So one of the things I would share with you guys is what's helped me the most, not just out of school to this day, is the support I got from school, surprisingly. The co-op office, the professors in particular, Nick helped me in ways that I still thank him to this day. He took time out when I missed a class, and it was crucial for me to take that class, to take my midterm. Victor, many a times, let me bring my own son to class because I didn't have a babysitter for the day. So this school has done a lot more than the usual if you ask. So even in the industry, if you ask the right question, if you ask for help because you're gonna need it in the early years, it's there. The mentors are there, we're too shy to contact them. There's 5 people sitting in front of you right here. Not one is going to respond with saying, I can't believe you emailed me. I can't believe you found me on Twitter today. I can't believe you had the nerve to call me.
Unless you don't actually have Twitter, in which case, like, that's a legit response.
That is true.
Then be weary. If an InfoSec person doesn't have Twitter, be very weary.
That would be me.
They are a ghost.
One they haven't made public, that is true.
Well, I did call Mike and I did get that Mike calling me, so I don't know.
Well, it could be personal, I'm not sure.
It's very personal with us.
One of the reasons why we are here today is to connect you guys to people who are already in the industry. So thank you very much for the panelists. It is Friday, guys. They had a long week and they're here for you to help you out, make use of it. In the last 3 minutes, if somebody has a question that must be answered by this panel, otherwise I will. A question, not a comment.
I do have a yes. I would love, only because this is totally self-serving, because I like to hear interesting stories from people. In like a sentence, maybe two, what thing have you seen in the industry that totally blindsided you and you were like, holy shit, that's a thing in security? I didn't even, like, I love that stuff, if you wouldn't mind sharing. Like, what just, you did, like, it blew your mind when the first time you saw it or encountered it in the industry? Like, what were you not prepared to all of a sudden experience?
Good and or bad?
Oh yeah, no, good or bad. Like, it's really cool, that's awesome, or holy, I don't want to do it.
Okay, so I have something as of super recent that I'm still battling with Microsoft about. We just changed our enterprise agreement and how we get our Microsoft licensing for Office 365 and Azure, and we went to a CSP model, which is a cloud service provider, a retailer, a reseller of the product. And basically they want full delegated global administrator rights into our tenant, and we have no way to impose any security controls on that account. And Microsoft thought this was like the most brilliant thing since Vista, I guess. And maybe haven't heard of Target. But yeah, third party with a full GA with no security controls kind of frightens me, and I am fighting with them on Twitter about it.
That's awesome. Jeff, do you have any amazing things you've seen in security?
This is going to sound pretty boring, but because we deal with SIEMs a lot, so honestly, just the sheer amount of data we have nowadays. You go back 15 years, you didn't have 50 terabyte data lakes. You had a single syslog server, or if you were lucky, it went to a syslog server rather than just being stored on Varlog. It's pretty badass nowadays. Like we have Intel feeds. We're at the point where we have to make data actionable, whereas before we just needed the damn data. Like we live in the damn future. It's awesome.
Fantastic. Lori, do you have any surprising things you've seen in the security industry?
Some of the processes and procedures that some companies have regarding security is baffling and mind-boggling, as in they have none until you walk in there and you're like, oh, you shouldn't have this. Oh, I didn't know about it, sort of deal. And because this is, in some sense, to some people, the latest and greatest industry to get into, just like I think development was or testing was at one point or another, you get a lot of people who are generally just say help desk, and miraculously somehow they get a job in as like security analyst or something, and they have no business being in this, but somehow or other they manage to get in, and you talk to them and they kind of think they're so confident, oh, I know what you're talking about. As you keep talking to them, you realize they really don't know what the heck they're kind of talking about. So, but you have to deal with them on a daily basis, so you kind of have to make do, and it goes back to having to being able to communicate with people without necessarily putting someone down is probably another career hack, because you never know, that person that you potentially do not like could next thing you know end up becoming a manager or someone that you actually have to report to, which is not a fun situation if you're kind of bad-mouthing them. So.
And almost a guarantee.
Yes.
Cheryl, do you have, sorry, were you going to add?
No, I was going to say, like, I've seen that happen of, we had a co-op once, and it was like the worst co-op you could think of. Like, you'd have like these little cubicles, and this guy would be like just sleeping most days, and you're talking about like really bad, like his legs would be up right in between the two things. So when you're walking into this column, like the first thing you see is just his crotch, right? and I'm not making this up. And then, you know, like, obviously the company didn't hire him for a repeat co-op or for a full-time job. And, you know, 6 months later, the rest of us were kind of joking. He's like, hey, I wonder what this guy's up to. And you look, and he's now like a senior security analyst or something like that at a bank. And you're like, really? Like, with this, his worth ethics and everything else, and you're just like, that's the way it goes, right? It's a lot of it ends up potentially being who you know or who someone else knows, and you know how good they are at playing the political game.
You sounded like more management material, let's say.
Could be.
Hey.
Awesome. Cheryl, if we can ask you something surprising, something shocking in the industry.
I have a couple stories, but I'll stick with one. Being up at 2 in the morning, talking to some of the smartest people you'll ever meet. When the ransomware broke out, and just before it hit the hospitals last year, people who were gagged by NDAs, and they were panicking about how the hell were we going to explain to the people who needed to know what was coming down the pipes, because nobody was going to believe this. And this was like several weeks before the shit hit the fan. This is our community. These are the people who, we don't sleep. Security never sleeps. Don't stop. Keep finding a way to do it. But yeah, that's what goes on, and it is mind-blowing when you're in the middle of it.
Thank you. Desiree, do you have anything you want to share with us?
So I guess as a pen tester, I've almost seen everything under the sun. So in some sense, nothing really surprises me anymore. But I think maybe one thing that I was less prepared for, and I think that maybe this would be good advice for people who are in the program, is a muscle that I hadn't really trained before working was that of technical writing. We don't really like to talk about the boring parts of the job, but reporting is an important part of the job, and technical writing is a skill that isn't very inherent to most of us. It does need to be learned, and yeah, I guess that's just the less pretty part of security that a lot of people aren't prepared for, is how much technical writing there is, and writing in a clear, concise manner so that the person ingesting the report can take action on what you've written. Because that's what they're paying for at the end of the day. They're not paying you to go break everything. They're paying you for the deliverable at the end of the day. So I guess just warning you guys.
So the only thing that's ever shocked me to this day, and I don't know if you people in forensics can probably figure out, the person that handed us the evidence was the person implicated. That has never happened before. Insider attack, yes, we find people inside the company who are involved in fraud and other things, but the person who actually had such a bad feeling. I'm like, I don't know, seems a bit clammy. But that person ended up being the person that was implicated through the investigation. That was shocking. I was just looking, double take, triple take, I'm like, no, this is completely a mistake. And then I called 2 other people over, I said, is this really what I'm looking at? So yeah. That was probably the most shocking. I think this is good enough for the panelists. STEM now for a Friday night. So thank you.
All right, thank you everybody. Sorry we ran a little on the late side there, but thank you for coming out. Big thanks to our panelists again, and hope to see you guys in a couple weeks.